Let me introduce her. This is my girlfriend, Mia. Kevin said with a smile, and the woman next to him greeted me. Nice to meet you. Girlfriend. I was stunned, and Kevin nonchalantly said, I guess I haven't told you yet. I'm marrying Mia. So, I want a divorce. What? I was speechless. Kevin spoke without caring about me at all. I realized that what Mom and the others were saying was right. After thinking about it calmly, it's been tough being with an older woman. Mia is young, 23 years old. After all, both a house and a woman are better brand new. Right? Mia, Kevin's affair partner, nodded with a tilt of her head. Besides, it's not a big deal, right? Just a fracture. I'm divorcing you because you're lazy and slack off on housework. Furthermore, we'll take the house. I was too stunned by such outrageous reasoning to even get angry. Faced with such a lack of common sense, I didn't feel like having a conversation anymore. I took a deep breath and said, Okay. Here, the divorce papers. I handed over the signed papers. You're well prepared. Ignoring the pleased couple, I started preparing to leave the house. As I was packing, Kevin said to me, You don't have anywhere to go back to, right? There's an apartment near Chinatown you can rent for $200. It's old and has cracks in the walls. Kevin, that's terrible. They laughed foolishly. I didn't respond and slammed the front door behind me. Let them laugh all they want. I have a place to go. It was a place Kevin and his ilk could never have imagined. My name is Grace. I'm turning 40 this year. I married Kevin, who is 35, 3 years ago. We don't have children, and we lived together in the house I bought when I was single. It's a second-hand house but renovated, so it's pretty nice. I bought a house before getting married. Because my family was poor since my childhood. It was because my dad wasn't around. To be precise, he disappeared before I was old enough to remember. I never knew where he was, and I lived with Mom. Mom loved me, but raising a child alone was hard. Still, as long as I had Mom, it was okay. However, Mom died of an illness when I was in high school. It was a shock. But I didn't have time to be immersed in sadness. From then on, I had to live on my own. Thinking so, I got a job at a small local advertising agency after graduating from high school. I worked hard as a salesperson. By the time I was over 30, I was so focused on my job that I thought I probably wouldn't marry. If so, I at least wanted my own castle. So, I saved money and bought a cheap, second-hand detached house. I took out a loan, but I've made several prepayments and have already paid it off. That's when I met Kevin. He was from a client company. I thought Kevin, 5 years younger, seemed a bit unreliable, but he was impressed by how efficiently I managed my work. Kevin asked for my contact information, and we started going out. I was surprised, but also felt happy. For someone who had lived work first with no family, it was the first time someone clearly told me they liked me. I accepted Kevin, and we started dating. Then, we quickly got married. Initially, Kevin's parents were against our marriage. I was older, and I had no parents. But Kevin defended me. Even without parents, Grace works hard. Don't say that. He firmly said this in front of his parents. I was genuinely happy. I thought it was good to marry Kevin. I could make it work with this person. But the change in Kevin came less than 6 months after we started living together. One night, when Kevin returned from work, he immediately sat down at the living room table. Dinner was meatloaf, salad, and soup. After starting to eat, Kevin put down his fork after a while. What's wrong? I've been meaning to say this for a while. Kevin sighed and said, "This soup, you made it in the morning, right? It feels like leftovers, and I don't like it. Could you make it fresh in the evening?" But that takes time. I work too, and I can't manage." "Sorry, but that sounds like an excuse. At my parents' house, we had different soups for morning and night. And, the side dishes are too few. I'd like at least 5. I was puzzled by the suddenness of it all. According to Kevin, he had been thinking this for a while but had held back. True, I'm not great at cooking, but I also work and can't manage to do anything too elaborate. Mom was a housewife, right? I work and I can't make that much. Don't make excuses. You're a housewife, it's only natural you should do at least that much. I was perplexed by Kevin's stubborn old man-like reasoning. But arguing further seemed like it would only worsen the mood, so I swallowed my words. I had my complaints, but I wanted to avoid any argument. After that, I tried to finish work by the official end time as much as possible and hurried home to cook. However, Kevin's comments escalated. "This is cheap meat, isn't it? This side dish is the same as yesterday's. Don't repeat a dish for at least a week." I adjusted each time, and gradually, cooking took over my life. Before I knew it, I was fretting over meals all day. Kevin's nitpicking didn't stop there. He would check every corner of the house for dust, complaining if it wasn't cleaned. I cleaned regularly, but it seemed it was never enough. "Don't just complain. If you notice, you could just do it yourself." When I finally snapped back, Kevin hurled terrible words at me. "What are you talking about? Housework isn't my job, don't shift the blame. I hate to say it, but maybe you really can't do housework properly because you had no parents." I was dumbfounded by his words. Kevin wasn't the type to insult someone for not having parents. Was the Kevin I saw then his true self, or was it all an illusion? I wished for the old Kevin to return. But my wish was in vain, and the situation only worsened. Kevin's demands for housework knew no bounds, and I was completely exhausted. Continuing like this, balancing work and home life would be tough. Encouraged by Kevin, I decided to resign from my job. It was a job I loved and had continued since graduating high school, but it couldn't be helped. Looking back, maybe I should have left him at that point. But until then, I had focused on my job and had little experience with romance. I didn't know what a normal family was. I thought meeting Kevin's demands was my duty as a wife. To maintain a peaceful home, I thought it was okay for me to endure a bit. Becoming a housewife allowed me significantly more time for housework. Kevin's complaints decreased, and I was genuinely relieved. I thought the problem was solved, but one holiday, Kevin went out in the evening to visit a friend who had just built a new home. He came back that night, reeking of alcohol. He must have drunk quite a bit. He was unusually talkative. "That guy's house is spacious and clean. The furniture was designed by famous designers, really stylish, and all the appliances are high-end, so everything looks great." "Is that so?" I nodded along and handed Kevin some water. "In contrast, this house being secondhand kinda bothers me." Saying that, Kevin drank the water and looked around the room. He seemed to have something more to say, looking at me. "I wish we could at least do something about the cheap furniture." Cheap. Indeed, the furniture and appliances I had since I was single were only a few years old and still in good shape. They were not high-end, but weren't cheap enough to be considered so. Besides, when Kevin moved in, he had said we would keep using the furniture and appliances as they were. I pointed that out, but well, living with it made me realize new furniture would be better. Kevin said this nonchalantly, without a hint of remorse. Saying that, it's still usable, and replacing it would be such a waste. I hinted as much, but Kevin suddenly looked at me with a mocking expression. That's exactly what makes you look poor. Guess you can't shake off that poverty mentality. What? How did you come to that conclusion? Anyway, I've quit my job, and we don't have the money for that. You quitting your job was your own decision. Excuse me? But you were the one who… Yeah, it's my fault again. With that, Kevin threw out his words and went into the bedroom. How could he say something so awful? Anger welled up in me, but I tried to convince myself it was just the alcohol talking. He's just big-headed because of the drink. Don't worry about it. But even when sober, Kevin's attitude continued to worsen. Our conversations turned into arguments, and all he did was complain about me. What had happened? And then, without asking me, Kevin went ahead and bought new furniture. He even seemed to have updated his golf equipment. He looked pleased as he admired his new golf clubs. Kevin is a salaried employee, but his salary isn't that high. He must have taken out a loan, and now that I can't work, I was worried about the repayment. My anxiety grew inside me. Then, an unexpected incident occurred. As I was heading to the supermarket to buy ingredients for dinner, as usual, I was walking down the street when suddenly a loud horn honked from behind. Immediately after, I felt a huge impact. And then my consciousness started to fade. When I woke up, I saw an unfamiliar ceiling. It seemed I was lying down. I felt pain all over and couldn't move my body. What happened to me? Grace, are you awake? An elderly woman nearby spoke to me. Where am I? You're in the hospital. You were brought here after a traffic accident. An accident? I remember leaving the house, but I have no memory after that. I moved my head. The sterile bed, the four hooked up to me, and the woman in nursing attire. So it really was a hospital. Looking outside the window, I realized it was already dark. I had left the house around 2 p.m., but quite a bit of time had passed. Later, a doctor came and briefly explained my condition. Apparently, I was hit by a car that was driving distractedly on my way to the supermarket. I wasn't in life-threatening condition, but I had several fractures and needed to stay in the hospital for a while. I never imagined I'd be in a traffic accident. After receiving a general explanation about my hospitalization, a nurse spoke up. We've contacted your husband, but… Her hesitant manner gave me a bad feeling. I immediately called Kevin. Hello, Kevin? Kevin sounded annoyed on the phone. Yeah, Grace? I got a call from the hospital earlier. You got into an accident? Clumsy. Hurry up and come back to make dinner. I'm going to be hospitalized. I couldn't comprehend what he was saying. Angry at my response, Kevin yelled back. Then what about the housework? What? The housework is more important than me? Unbelievable. He was more worried about housework than his wife's well-being. Anger bubbled up inside me, and we ended up fighting for a while. Arguing further seemed pointless. I hung up the phone, still irritated. Kevin had started to speak horribly recently, but I hadn't realized he was this cold. I was furious all day, and the pain made it hard to sleep. Nevertheless, my strength gradually returned over the next few days. And I started rehabilitation. It was tough to move at first after lying in bed for so long, but it became somewhat enjoyable. Rehabilitation was a good distraction from too much thinking while lying in bed. Since then, there had been no contact from Kevin. Thinking it would only upset me to talk, I also ignored him. Around that time, I occasionally passed an elderly man in the hallway. He was well dressed, so he wasn't a patient. I initially thought he was a visitor, but he seemed to be looking at me. One day, the man approached me. Are you Grace? Yes. But why? I answered, wary. At that time, I didn't know yet that this man would set my destiny in motion. Eventually, after about a month in the hospital, I was discharged. I wasn't completely healed, but I was told the rest could be managed with outpatient visits. I could finally go home. My house felt strangely nostalgic after a month. But that feeling was short-lived. The moment I opened the front door, I sensed something was off. There were unfamiliar shoes. Flashy pink heels with ribbons. No way. I rushed into the living room to find the house dramatically changed. Not just the furniture, but also the appliances had been replaced with new, high-end models. Even the curtains were different, making it feel like someone else's house. There you are, Grace. Back from the hospital? Kevin emerged, looking carefree. Next to him was a young woman. With her brown hair and shoulder-exposing outfit, she lazily said, "Welcome back." Who are you?" I was dumbfounded, and Kevin smiled at me. Let me introduce you. This is my girlfriend, Mia. Nice to meet you. Girlfriend. I guess I haven't told you yet. I'm marrying Mia. So, I want a divorce. What? I was speechless. Kevin continued. I realized what Mom and the others said was right. Without proper parents, one can't do household chores well. It's embarrassing being poor, and though at first, I thought being with an older woman like you would be reliable, upon reflection, it's become hard. Mia is young, 23 years old. After all, both a house and a woman are better when they're new. Right? Mia tilted her head and nodded in agreement. Besides, it's not a big deal, right? Just a fracture. I'm divorcing someone who slacks off on housework over that. We'll take the house. I was too stunned by such an outrageous claim to even get angry. Don't misunderstand. Though I plan to buy a new house eventually, this house is just a stopgap until we buy the next one. Faced with such lack of common sense, I no longer felt like having a conversation. The Kevin I knew was gone. What stood before me was not human. I decided to think of him as a non-communicable monster. Fighting wouldn't solve anything. I took a deep breath and said, "Okay. Here, the divorce papers." Which I had pre-signed. So you're already ready. Given the recent hostility, I thought it might eventually come to this and had prepared them. Ignoring the two of them, I immediately started packing. I had to prepare to leave the house. While I was busy, Kevin spoke up. You don't have anywhere to go back to, right? There's an apartment near Chinatown you can rent for $200. It's old and has cracks in the walls. Kevin, that's terrible. They laughed foolishly. I didn't respond and slammed the front door behind me. I took one last look back at the house. My castle, which I had struggled to buy. This was the last time I would see it. But I had no regrets. I had a place to go. A week later, as I was relaxing in my new home, the doorbell suddenly rang insistently. Checking the monitor, it was Kevin and Mia. Ignoring them, they started shouting my name frantically. Their half-crazed appearance almost made me laugh. After observing for a while, I spoke through the doorbell. What do you want? How come you're living in this mansion? Indeed, the mansion they referred to was where I now lived. A 3-story reinforced concrete building, complete with a pool in the yard. Did you come all this way just to say that? No, we have a proposal. Open up. We want to talk face to face. It must be a worthless conversation, right? No, it's important. Persistently, Kevin said. This is the last time. I stressed and opened the door. I let them into the sitting room. Though I had communicated with Kevin a few times about changing the house's title, I hadn't told him where I was. When I asked how they knew this place, it turned out Kevin had coincidentally followed me from the street. He was shocked to see me entering this mansion, expecting to see me living in an old apartment. Then, Kevin and Mia came up with a brazen plan. Kevin began. "Look, the only reason a poor person like you could live in such a mansion is because you're doing something shady, right?" "What? Why?" Kevin started with something that made no sense, and I was dumbfounded. "I saw it. You were with that old man entering this house," Kevin said confidently. "You don't want to admit it, I get it. Being poor, you have no choice but to earn money that way. But introduce Mia to those clients. She's good at ingratiating herself with old men at the club. She can definitely earn more than you, Grace." Mia laughed along. I calmly said, "What are both of you talking about? The person I was with is probably Dad. After all, this house belongs to my father." "What? Don't lie. You don't have parents." As Kevin was making noise, the door to the sitting room opened. "What's all this noise?" The elderly man who came out was greeted by me. "Dad." "Dad?" Kevin was shocked, and Dad, sitting next to me, introduced himself. Kevin, right? My daughter mentioned you. Nice to meet you. I'm Grace's dad, John." "What? What do you mean?" Kevin looked back and forth between us, bewildered. It was understandable. I had only recently reunited with my dad, John, while in the hospital. Yes, the elderly man who approached me then was John. John was supposed to have disappeared. I had heard this from Mom, so I thought it might be a mistake. But as I talked to this man, I realized he truly was my real dad. John had gone to Brazil to start a business. He planned to call us over once the business was on track. However, he was robbed there, stripped of everything he had. All his business funds were taken, and he was left without any means of communication. Lost, John found help through a man he met there and ended up working for the man's company. Starting with odd jobs and gradually moving up, he eventually became the secretary to the company president. Later, with the man's assistance, John became independent. His business was successful, and John achieved social success. However, he was always worried about us, his family. The busyness prevented him from returning home, but he also felt guilty for neglecting us for so long and found it hard to face us. At that time, John's company started a new venture in the United States. After much deliberation, John decided to return home. He built a house here and started searching for me and Mom. That's when he found out Mom had passed away. John was tormented by deep regret. He wished he had returned sooner. John longed to meet me as soon as possible and visited me in the hospital. That's how I came to live in this mansion, owned by John. I briefly explained all this. John had also investigated Kevin's affair. Kevin used to go to a club with a colleague after playing golf occasionally, and Mia was a woman he met there. So, this place is my real home. Understand? No one told me a rich dad would suddenly appear. Kevin murmured in a weak voice. But if you're so wealthy, would you come to my workplace? Mia, eager to hand her business card to John. Typical of the woman Kevin would choose, utterly shameless. John immediately gestured with his hand to stop her. I'm sorry, but I make it a point not to visit such establishments. Mia was speechless. Of course. John does visit high-end restaurants for work, but would never go to a cheap club where Mia works. Besides, I don't have any money. Grace has inherited it all. What? Kevin and Mia were shocked, and John casually answered. About $1.1 billion. It's the least I could do after neglecting her all these years. They stood there, mouths agape, in disbelief. I've heard about you too from Grace. Especially Kevin. You've said some terrible things to Grace. She saved from her meager salary to buy that house and did her best with the household chores. Without a mother, she had no one to teach her, yet you trampled over Grace's feelings, saying cruel things, and even had an affair while still married to her. If it came down to it, you could be sued. John said this slowly, and Kevin recoiled. But we won't do that. It's also my fault Grace had to struggle. I also decided to speak my mind for the last time. You've always ridiculed me for being poor or for not having parents. I'm sick of someone like you who lacks any human decency. Don't ever come to this house again. Goodbye. They didn't say anything, just looked frustrated. As they sat there without leaving, I coldly told them, "Do you still have something to say? If you're done, please leave." Overwhelmed by our cold stares, they finally left the house. But peering through the window, they seemed to resentfully look back at our house, reluctant to leave. Seeing this, John opened the door to the doghouse in the yard. Two fierce Dobermans leaped out. "Help!" Kevin and Mia screamed as they ran away. John and I couldn't help but laugh together, watching them. It had been a long time since I laughed so much. This would surely be the last time we saw them. Now, I could finally live a peaceful life. I felt deeply relieved. Later, I learned that their subsequent fate was rather pitiful. Kevin and Mia continued to live in that house, but then a tornado hit the area. The heavy rain caused the nearby river to overflow, flooding many homes in the vicinity. Fortunately, the area where I lived was not affected, but the house where the two of them lived suffered considerable damage. They managed to escape, but Kevin's prized luxury furniture, new golf equipment, and Mia's brand items were all soaked. Moreover, the house's pillars had rotted due to being submerged in water for a long time. With nowhere to live, the two of them ended up staying in a shelter for a while. Kevin's family lived too far away to return. Mia's family situation was even worse. Her parents were unemployed and addicted to gambling, living on welfare in a cramped apartment. She had kept this hidden from Kevin, pretending to be a lady of leisure. Mia herself worked at a club but lived paycheck to paycheck with no savings. Kevin had accumulated debt from constantly purchasing high-end furniture and golf gear. Having lived his life relying on women to provide financially, Kevin was at a loss. With no other options, they reluctantly moved into the old apartment near Chinatown, which Kevin had mentioned earlier for me, with rent at $200. Ironically, despite having mocked it, Kevin and Mia ended up living in that apartment. What goes around comes around. Unless they sincerely reflect on their actions, they will never have peace. Meanwhile, having resigned from my previous job, I decided to start looking for a new one. When I discussed this with John, I was able to join his company. The job is in sales, similar to my previous one, and I find it fulfilling. There's still a lot to learn, but I'm working hard to become a valuable team member as soon as possible. In John's mansion, we sometimes host parties for work-related contacts. My sales experience proves useful, and I can engage in conversation with virtually anyone. Looking forward, I also plan to study languages, considering the possibility of working abroad. John often tells me, "You seem more lively than when we reunited." It's hard to believe I was constantly irritated every day while living with Kevin not so long ago. Life is unpredictable. Even if you face hardships, they don't last forever. And if you live looking forward, there will always be someone who notices. I believe this and want to continue living brightly into the future.